Good afternoon, good morning, depending on the time you're joining us. Thank you so much for joining us and on time. We have about 99 people here on the call. Really amazing to see all of you joining in on time. We're just going to wait a few more minutes for some other people to join us and then we would begin. Thank you so much. Please give us a few minutes and we'll get started. Thank you so much, everyone. Good afternoon once again. Thank you so much for joining. Please, if you can hear me, put up the thumbs. Let me know you can hear me. Just make a sign, thumbs up or something. Let me know you can hear me and you can see me. Great. All right. So once you put up the hand, you can put it down again. So um, we would be able to know how we're communicating. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining. Welcome to the World NGO Day 2025 webinar brought to you by Hexa Media and Africa NGOs. We're going to be quickly getting into our conversation so we don't take so much of your time. But before we go into that, let's see who we are, why we're here, and what we're here to talk about, right? And so, like I said before, when I first started, this webinar is brought to you by Africa NGOs. Africa NGOs is a vital platform on X, formerly Twitter. For those of you who already know about Africa NGOs, I'm sure you've been following the amazing work, and it's a platform for sharing news and resources related to African nonprofits, managed by David Bernard, a seasoned philanthropy and NGO consultant with over 25 years of experience. It supports NGO leaders, donors, and stakeholders while promoting the impact of African NGOs. You can follow on Twitter so you get to hear everything and get to see and read everything that is going on that platform. And then we also have Hexa Media. a full-service digital media agency that helps African NGOs and impact-driven businesses leverage tech, media, and communications for growth and impact. You can visit our website, www.hexamedia.africa, to learn more about us. And who are the hosts for today? As you already know, this is brought to you by Hexa Media and African NGOs. And David Bernard is a development consultant and also, like I said, the founder of African NGOs. He is the host. And myself, Emanuela Imo, I'm a communications consultant and the CEO of Hexa Media Africa. We are super excited and super happy to host this, having you over 1,000 people registered for this webinar. Super, super, super duper. And we are so happy to be sharing with you, but also happy for the wealth of knowledge that is going to be, spread across today from our panelists that we have on board. And I would just like to confirm that this meeting is recorded, so we're able to share the replay with you. So please give me 1 second. Let me just quickly confirm that this meeting is recording, because I'm not sure it is at the moment. 1 second, everyone. So I would stop sharing and confirm that we are recording. Okay, it's recording. Wonderful. Okay, so I'll continue to share my screen and we would continue in our conversation. Thank you so much. I see the chats. Wonderful. Super amazing. Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. All right. So I already see in the chat you guys have started introducing yourselves, which is super amazing. Let's have some quick introductions. So please tell me where you're joining us from, your name, your country, your organization. Tell us in the chat where you're joining us from. My name is Emanuela. I'm joining us from Cyprus. I'm a Nigerian, but I'm joining us from Cyprus and joining from Hexa Media. So tell us in the chat. Let's see in the chat where you're joining us from. I see some people from Botswana. How is Botswana going today? What's the weather like? It's really cold here in Cyprus. So tell me, where are you joining us from? Where are you joining us from? Let me quickly go into the chat. Where are you joining us from? What's your name? Make sure you're connecting with someone, by the way. I see Nairobi, Kenya. Wonderful. I see South Africa. I see Nigeria. How is Nigeria today? I see Namibia. I see UK. I see Senegal. Wonderful, wonderful. Everyone all the way in different African countries. I see Waxy, Nigeria. Wonderful. Really amazing to have you all here. Uganda, Ghana, everyone. Amazing, amazing. Beyond dropping where you're joining us from, please make sure you're connecting with someone, right? Make sure you make a new friend today. I see so many organizations here. And like I said, when we first started, over 1,000 people registered for this. And this means a lot of people to really connect with, right? So why exactly are we here today? It's World NGO Day. And before we even go into the conversation, I just want to say a big well done to every NGO that is right here in this meeting with us. Well done on saving humanity. Well done on the work you do for humanity, the beneficiaries that you help, the communities that you're transforming. Well done, well done, well done. So please tell someone in the chat, Happy World NGO Day. Tell someone in the chat, Happy World NGO Day. So World NGO Day is an international day dedicated to recognizing and celebrating, all non-governmental organizations and non-profit organizations and the people behind them that contribute to the society all year round. And so to you, my sisters and brothers in arms, you are the real MVPs here. You are the real change makers. You are the ones who are changing the world. And we're simply here to say, well done, well done, Well done. That's the only thing we can say to you. And for this year's celebration, we have chosen the theme, Reimagining African NGOs from Survival to Sustainability. And I know that David is going to shed more light on this, but when we were coming up with this idea, when we had the idea of having this team for this event, we actually didn't know that it was going to be this relevant as it is right now. And relevant because, as you already know, there's been some issues with the US aid freezing the funding, especially for African countries, and we are all super affected. And it means that right now, this is a very important topic that we really need to begin to look into and talk about. And so it shows the relevance of the topic reimagining. We want to begin to reimagine and move from survival to sustainability. The theme emphasizes shifting from a short-term, crisis-driven operations to long-term strategic growth. Just a few years ago, COVID struck and everything in the world, the plans, the operations were halted, and a lot of organizations were affected. And a few years down the line, we're having the US aid issues again. And so this means we need to begin to reimagine a lot of the things that we do. And so we're here to equip African NGOs with the right funding models, technology and operational structures to thrive, and ensure that you are not just surviving every challenge that comes, but you are building sustainable impact for the future. It's not about now, it's more about the future and what is forthcoming. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come again to the chat to ensure that everyone can hear me. Because sometimes with tech, sometimes people cannot hear you. Okay, great. So I will just go on. And so our objective and aim for today is simple. We want to have an open conversation, a forward-thinking conversation, drawing on the panelist expertise and participants' input, guided by the webinar theme, right? We asked a lot of questions when we set up the registration process, and we saw so many questions, 1,180 of you sent in your questions, and they just began to reemphasize the need for having to reimagine how we actually carry out activities, processes, operations within the African NGO space. And so we're here to just, examine how things are being done, what the current challenges are, and explore ways to strengthen your sustainability, innovation, and operational efficiency in 2025 and beyond. And I'm going to be moving it quickly very soon to David to go on with the conversation. But before I do that, let's have a quick poll, right? It's just a yes or no answer. And I don't want to assume what the answers will be, but are you currently affected by the US aid funding freeze? Yes or no? Please drop in the chat. Are you currently affected by the US aid funding freeze? Yes or no? Just yes or no. I just want to see in the chat. Let's see if there is actually a need for this conversation in the first place. I know a lot of you have sent in your questions, and like I said, our panelists are going to speak to most of the important things that have been shared. But let's see in the chat. Yes or no? Are you affected? I see yes, yes, no, no. Yes, we have a partnership with Yali. Oh, yes, no. Okay, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Please keep your answers coming. Keep your answers coming. And while the answers are coming, David, I would hand over to you now without further ado, so we could go straight up into the conversation for today.
Thank you very much, Emanuela, for those introductory comments. You've probably made my work much easier. I also want to greet and welcome everyone that have made the time to join us this afternoon. And thank you for the response to this webinar. Getting 1,000 registrations is a little bit overwhelming, but I think it's also not a surprise, and it's also not a coincidence. Many people on this call, as you can see, all the yeses popping up, as well as people working in the African NGO sector, are deeply concerned about the current state of affairs and what the future holds for their organizations. Emanuela gave the background to when and how we conceptualized this event. It was really just about World NGO Day and to celebrate African NGOs when we did this in early January. Fast forward to a few weeks later, and obviously the aid, development, and the NGO sector have been turned on its head based on the decision by the Trump administration. So this afternoon's conversation, or today's conversation, is not specifically about USAID and the aid freeze. I think there are many other conversations that are dealing with that specific issue at the moment. But that decision ultimately provides critical context for the issues that we're going to discuss today. Emanuela referenced COVID. It feels like ages ago, but it's just 3 or 4 years ago. That also sent shockwaves through the NGO sector, caused disruption in many organizations' operations. In response to that, and myself and people from EPIC Africa were central to studying and recording the implications of COVID on African NGOs. There were calls for future-proofing the sector. And interesting enough, some of the issues that we will discuss today were also part of those recommendations: diversifying funding, streamlining operations, and the use of technology. So, but very soon and very quickly thereafter, things have returned to kind of business as usual. And it seems to some extent we have lost sight of many of those structural and historical issues and challenges that continue to face and impact the work of African NGOs. The one difference, and this would be my last opening comment because I think the panelists can give a lot more perspective to these issues. I think the one big difference from COVID, where we have seen a return to many of the funding levels post-COVID, and we saw how COVID accelerated issues around unrestricted funding, localization, shift the power, et cetera, Those were positive outcomes from the COVID pandemic and the implications for the NGO and philanthropy sector. This time around, the one big difference is that the funding issue will not be temporarily. It is probably going to be permanent. And that has far-reaching implications, not as a funding issue in its own right, but how organizations are set up, how they are geared, how they are structured, individually and as a sector collectively, to deal with these issues in a very different and fast-changing context. And as we all know, in terms of announcements in recent weeks, what started with USAID is not going to stop there. You know, the UK, the Dutch, et cetera, bilateral funding as we know it probably will change forever. And who knows how that will also impact kind of the wider funding scene. So to move from survival to sustainability, to reimagine the sector, start thinking differently about our sector and inside of the sector, something has to change. The aid and development sector or ecosystem as we know it is probably gone forever. Now, the issues that I've just referenced, we're not going to solve them in one conversation this afternoon. And hopefully this is a conversation starter and that will complement many other processes that are ongoing and are going to take these issues forward. But I do hope, and also in our discussions with the panelists, that everyone that made the time to join the call this afternoon will leave today with some real food for thought as it relates to their organizations and hopefully some practical actions that they can take their organizations and start implementing almost immediately. So I'm going to stop there and I'll hand back to Emanuela to quickly introduce our panelists, and then we'll jump straight into the conversation.
Thank you so much for that robust addition to what I just, finished talking about, and it's really amazing to see so many people keen into this right now. And like I said again, thank you so much everyone for joining us and joining us on time. So before we quickly get into introducing our panelists, just a few housekeeping rules, just so you can get the full benefit of this program today. It is important that you shut out distractions as much as possible. Use the chat function to communicate. I see some people in the chat already saying that the question box isn't working. Feel free to drop all your questions in the chat. Right, we're going to be sifting through that. If you can use the question box, great, but if you can't, use the chat box. And also, do not be worried. A recording would be available after this meeting, just so you can catch up on anything that you missed out on. And as much as possible, try to connect with someone before you leave here today. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, permit me to introduce to you our amazing panelist. And first on the list is Alice Kanengoni. She's the Chief Executive Officer, Southern African Trust. Alice has over 20 years of experience advocating for social justice, gender justice, and women's rights in Africa. She has served in regional organizations, in roles providing strategic leadership, program design and management, grant making, advocacy and communications, accountability and learning. Alice has successfully led the design and implementation of several power shifting strategies and interventions towards women's economic justice, including strategies to support self-organizing movements of domestic workers, women informal and cross-border traders, rural women farmers, and young women. Her research and knowledge generation work has contributed towards shaping Afrocentric discourses on feminist macroeconomics, inclusive health and education, among others. She's passionate about feminist and liberatory knowledge management praxis and has contributed to the body of knowledge challenging inequalities and poverty on the African continent. Alice earned tertiary level qualifications in arts, media and communications, executive team coaching, and monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Next on our list is another amazing person all the way from WAXI, Charles Kojo Van Dijk, the head capacity development at WAXI. Charles is a development practitioner, thought leader, and advocate for transformative change in majority world communities. As the head of capacity development at WAXI and a member of the Ringo Systems Change Initiative, Charles has been instrumental in strengthening civil society organizations to drive sustainable community-led impact. With credentials as a certified Change the Game Academy Master Trainer and an IFC Learning and Performance Institute trainer, he blends a wealth of practical expertise with a deep passion for leadership development, organizational growth, and systems transformation. Charles is also a recognized podcaster, amplifying critical conversations on global development, equity, and innovation. He also serves as a trustee of Intrac and an advisory board member of Disrupt Development. We are not done yet. We have another amazing person all the way from Microsoft, Wanjiku Jin, Partner Development Manager at Microsoft. She is an ICT leader for development with over 10 years of experience working for multinational technology vendors to drive the adoption of digital transformation in multiple industries throughout Africa. At Microsoft, she works as a partner development manager, supporting technology adoption through Microsoft technology partners in the international development and nonprofit sectors to achieve social impact. She focuses on supporting NGOs' mission attainment through building AI-enabled cloud digital ecosystems and platforms to address their imperatives, such as resource planning, donor management and engagement, volunteer engagement and management, and program delivery and monitoring for continuously improved outcomes. Previously, she was a software cloud architect designing solutions that digitalize clients' technology requirements in the financial, government, and health sectors. And last but not the least, we have Janet Mawiyo, executive leadership coach and organization development consultant, Galvanizing Africa Consult. Janet's life passion is to stimulate the growth of authentic leaders. At the end of June 2021, she stepped down from her role as executive director of the Kenya Community Development Foundation, KCDF, after 17 years of outstanding leadership in growing a recognized African foundation that promotes the sustainable development of communities. Before her tenure at KCDF, Janet worked in various roles in several international organizations, including Action Aid International in Kenya and Tanzania, and the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, NORAD. She has served on various boards of philanthropic organizations in Kenya and beyond, including Trust Africa, Accountable Now, Africa Philanthropy Network, and the East Africa Philanthropy Network, and was the chair of the Open Society Initiative of East Africa until July 2023. Janet serves on the boards of I&M Bank Foundation, ADAPO, the investment arm of KCDF, and is a member of the Advisory Council of the Global Initiative Against Transnational Crimes. She is a certified executive leadership coach, as well as a certified organization development consultant. Ladies and gentlemen, you can tell me that we have the greatest lineup for you right here today to share from their wealth of experience. And so, David, I would hand over to you for the panel discussion. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Emanuela. And let's get straight into the discussion. So both Emanuela and myself provided some context for today's conversation. And I'm going to start off by moving it to a even more practical level. I'm going to ask Charles and Alice, people that represent two organizations that work with many NGOs and other civil society organizations in West Africa and Southern Africa, to maybe just share with us a few perspectives on what are they learning from those organizations. What are the challenges that those organizations are raising with them, and including in there, the fallout from COVID, the fallout from the USAID decision, issues to do with the support environment, are there limitations to what is available to support NGOs on the continent? And then almost to end off in a very provocative way, what are some of the uncomfortable questions that African NGOs, as well as other role players, should be asking and should be answering themselves about moving the sector forward? So Charles, I want to start with you. Please share with us your perspectives, and then we'll hand over to Alice.
So thank you so much, Barnard. Thank you for this invitation. Thank you to African NGOs, Hexa Media, and colleagues and comrades on the call. It's nice to see so many familiar faces. I'm really honored to be part of this conversation. So David sent me a message and said I shouldn't hold back. So I'll try and speak straight from my heart and from my experience. So, I think, let us be honest, many of us who are working with African NGOs or CSOs, we feel stuck. And if you remember the Humanitarian report, it described it quite aptly, that we are in a starvation cycle. We are always chasing short-term projects just to stay afloat. Most of our funding is project-based. We rarely cover our core costs, staff development, or even do long-term planning. So one of my colleagues once described this situation to me by saying it's like we are running a marathon, but only getting water in short sprints, right? So this begs the question, how can we focus on real impact when we are just trying to survive, right? And I think this is a question we need to reflect on. But here's the issue. We cannot work with communities to become more resilient and transformative if we are barely surviving. So I believe, and I sincerely believe, that I don't think sustainability should mean just getting by. What we popularly describe in Ghana as living from hand to mouth. I believe that it should mean thriving, having the resources to build strong institutions, plan for the future, and create lasting change. That is why I believe we need to rethink how we resource and fund our organizations. So how do we shift this? How does this happen? I think, first of all, we need to see ourselves differently. We should not see ourselves as just aid recipients, but investment opportunities. So there must be a mindset shift from this idea of scarcity to abundance. And that's where I believe we'll draw our innate power from. I believe that this shift will open doors to diverse funding, whether through community giving, diaspora contributions, earned income, or endowments. And I believe that this is the type of flexible funding that will help us focus on long-term goals, not just the next project. But the thing is, it's not just about money, right? It's about how we think. That means our leadership, our executive leadership, and many of us are at that level, and boards need to embrace entrepreneurial thinking. I know an organization in Ghana that runs a very interesting vocational program that equips young people with skills and also generates income for the organization. So it's a typical social enterprise model, right? And they are doing very well. I also know a community-based organization that has monetized its knowledge and stakeholder engagement methods to bring in income, or what you may call revenue, while delivering impact, right? So the evidence I've seen from these two organizations show that these models strengthen resilience and also allow room for innovation. And there are so many of these examples that we need to bring to the surface so that they don't become the exception, but they actually become the norm, right? So this brings me to the issue of wealth creation, right? And I know that there'll be a lot of eyebrows and a lot of emotions that will come with this phrase, wealth creation. And this is because some see this concept as conflicting with our values, that is, our civic values or our civil society values. But I argue that it's actually the opposite. I believe that when organizations generate income, they gain independence in the real sense of the word. They can set their own priorities, respond quickly to community needs, and engage with funders as equal partners, right? So whether through social enterprises, digital fundraising, or investments, for example, like property or renewable energy projects, wealth creation, I believe, ensures sustainability. So it's not about getting rich. And I know that people will be thinking, no, is he saying that we should get rich? No, it's not about getting rich for getting rich sake. It's about securing resources to keep doing important work, right? And I think one of the things that can help us is technology. And we need to embrace technology. Digital tools and AI can help us make our operations more effective, help us to identify funding opportunities, and more importantly, to be able to track our impact or our results or our milestones in real time. But digital transformation itself must be thoughtful, right? When we are applying it within our sector, we need to apply it in a thoughtful way, prioritizing accessibility, ethical use, and data protection. That means we need to start investing in digital skills, cybersecurity, which I think is essential for strengthening our efficiency in our ecosystem, right? But with all the things I've said, if we don't sort out the issues around leadership, we will not get there. And here, when I talk about leadership, it's not about executive directors, because I know that usually when you mention leadership, the focus is on executive directors and the board. No, it's about the whole teams, all our members, right? So how do we invest in mentorship, continuous learning, and succession planning, right, from the bottom up, right? I believe if we do this, we'll keep our organizations resilient, even when key leaders move on, because people move on. That is just the nature of things. People move on to other interests, right? But our organizations must thrive beyond individuals, right? So strong leadership will drive innovation, will inspire communities, and build trust with our stakeholders. In all these things, collaboration is key. I don't think in our sector we should be looking at competitive advantage. It just doesn't make sense. We should be looking at collaborative advantage, right? Because I've always argued that no organization can achieve sustainability alone. You cannot get to where you are when you are behaving like an island. We cannot be sustainable alone, right? Partnerships are key with funders, whether they are traditional funders or non-traditional, private sector, peer organizations, our peers, right? Because this presents an opportunity for us to work together to co-design solutions, share resources, and advocate for change. And of course, these partnerships must be based on mutual respect, right? Where we are actually active players instead of like passive kind of recipients, right? Further to this, networking or networks and coalitions are very important to this conversation. Working together, pulling our resources together, sharing knowledge, and I believe it will help us to influence policies more effectively. We are seeing what I'm talking about firsthand in our work with NGOs across West and Central Africa, right? We are seeing this challenge firsthand, right? Many of the challenges that these organizations are facing, you may think are historical, which is true, but they've been worsened by recent disruptions. David mentioned it and Emmanuel mentioned this, COVID-19, exposing the fragility of project-based funding, right? Many of organizations struggled to open when the projects paused or froze, which has become a very popular term these days, right? Some organizations adapted. Some saw it as an opportunity to do things differently. So they adapted and diversified their income and embraced digital tools, while others are still catching up and are struggling, right? And so the very popular USAID aid freeze, and not only that, the policy direction of several European countries, including recently the announcement by UK to spend more on defense and cutting down on international aid, is of course adding pressure and forcing many of our NGOs to cut programs and staff, of course, and that is going to undermine progress that we've made for so many years, right? So David asked, what is missing in the support environment? And I would like to focus on that. What is missing? I think what is missing is long-term flexible funding that covers core costs, investments in leadership, and platforms for peer learning. But beyond resources, like David said, we need honest conversations to reflect on some critical questions. And I want to pose 3 questions for all of us to think about deeply. And while you're thinking about this, think about it in the context of your organization, right? The first question, are we building organizations that can weather future shocks? Second question, are we asking uncomfortable questions about our dependence on external aid? Third question, how can we strengthen local philanthropy and community-driven funding models, right? And these questions are important for us to reflect and think deeply about, because I strongly believe that ultimately the goal is agency, right? And that financial independence will allow us to lead change and shape our own agenda and tackle our own challenges, not just innovatively, but with indigenous solutions that make sense to us and that make sense to those that we say we are representing, right? So I'm convinced that sustainability is more than survival. It is about thriving, right? And I would like to end here by just emphasizing that achieving sustainability is not easy. So any institution or person who comes to you or who says in any platform or in any space that they have a magic formula or a set of tools, right, or an approach to achieve sustainability is not being honest with you. Because I believe that it takes bold thinking, creative approaches, and strong partnerships, right? And you will have to then start to see challenges as possibilities and opportunities to explore. And I believe if we have this mindset shift, when we do get there, I believe that we will not just transform our organizations, but will help also working with members of the communities to transform the communities that we serve or that we say we are representing. So I just want to end here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Charles. I'm not going even to try and summarize what you've just shared with us. But I think even if we just reflect on those three questions towards the end of your input, which really cuts to the chase in terms of what is at stake and what we ultimately need to respond to. So I'm going to turn it to Alice. Alice, from Charles gave us a broad perspective, but also obviously informed by the West African experience. Anything from a Southern African experience and the organizations that you are supporting and interacting with on a day-to-day basis? Anything else that you would like to add in terms of setting the context and the scene for this discussion?
So thank you very much, David, and thank you so much, Charles, for also your presentation, which in a way, if I had not heard that you represent West Africa, I would have thought you were coming from Southern Africa. So the challenges are effectively the same. But of course, there are nuances there. So I like to think of it in terms of resilience. And it's one of those things. I think you used the word sustainability. And as I reflected on the questions when David shared them earlier, I thought of this more in terms of resilience and the questions around resilience and the resilience of African NGOs and Southern African NGOs in the sector. So I kind of broke it down to 4 key forms of resilience, which I think kind of summarizes what Charles just shared. So there is a big question and big challenges around institutional resilience, just the ability to attract and retain staff, NGOs' ability to attract and retain staff and build stable, sustainable organizations. Many organizations are forced to actually cut on staff that they need to be able to do this kind of work that we see also really escalating in terms of the need. If you think of it in terms of the crises that are characterizing the continent, that are characterizing the sector. And so there is then that challenge in that stretch where the institutional resilience is challenged, and yet at the same time, you are actually not able to attract and retain staff. And you are also pushed to streamline the work to make do with depleted resources, especially as funders also shift priorities to respond to the crisis in different ways. So that's one form of resilience that I think will be really important to flag. Then linked closely to it is financial resilience. So I think of it as a little bit different from institutional resilience, because this is the ability to attract and effectively then deploy the adequate financial resources to finance the work and plans of the organization. But also this is also the nature in which those resources either mobilized or either received, and then what leeway and latitude NGOs have in terms of deploying them effectively. So Charles mentioned already that, we all know that most of the funding is project-based, short-term, and the funding models and the funding cycles are not necessarily responsive to longer-term kind of interventions and initiatives. And many funders, for instance, expect measurable outcomes in 1 or 2 years. And experience has shown us that, for you to really then, for NGOs rather, to think about sustainable systems level change becomes a challenge. So That I think is very, very important. But we are seeing more and more challenges, David and colleagues. We are seeing more and more challenges around mission resilience, the ability of NGOs to sustain the core mission of the work that they want to do or that they purpose to do in the face of competing funder and sector interests. And I think this is really important, especially if you take it also in a context where we are seeing shrinking civic space, increasing demands on NGOs due to crises, and organizations then struggle to really remain relevant and responsive, especially where there's limited space and resourcing to do foresight planning, to find the spaces for strategizing, and many, many funders are not keen actually to fund reflection spaces, convenings, and so on. So that I think is very, very important. And then Charles also referenced technology as one of those things that NGOs need to be adapting and embracing. But again, there are challenges there around technological resilience, that ability to keep up with the fast changing tech developments that are necessary for the work. Many NGOs are yet to even have a website because the resources have not been available. How do we even then talk about adapting to AI? The world is being increasingly centered around technology and tech-based work platforms and so on and so. And yet, many of the kind of resources that NGOs have access to do not support that. Because they don't really take those as the technological infrastructure as part of the project funding that many funders are happy to provide. Why? Because there is again pressure to demonstrate, impact for you to be able to show results at the end of it. So to divert resources and be able to be, tech savvy to put in place the technological infrastructure becomes a challenge. So those are, ways in which we see the resilience of our NGOs being challenged. And then I also thought of a fifth one around the idea that many of the civil society organizations and NGOs are experiencing the above things while operating also in increasingly restrictive environments, which in itself I think is a huge challenge that we ought to be talking about in terms of how do we protect and keep the space open to actually do the work. A number of the governments in our regions either have NGOs laws that curtail the work of NGOs or are thinking about it. And we can name quite a number. I don't need to go into that. And we know that a number of these challenges are historical. And I know that Charles also mentioned that, yes, they are historical, and we've seen that they've been exacerbated, especially in the context of crisis that many NGOs are currently trying to do the work. But what is important, which I think will be a very, very important point to highlight and for us to reflect on, is the fact that because of that history, when you think about the history of NGOs and the genesis of NGOs and how we came to have NGOs in the fray, it comes very, very closely linked to the history of aid on the continent. And I think that is a reality that we ought to contend with, because we all know the attachments, the conditionalities, and the assumptions, more importantly, the assumptions that often framed and informed aid and how aid is being deployed on the continent. And that, I think we see a reflection, a mirror of that, of course, in how support comes to NGOs, the power asymmetries that come with that, the assumptions around capacity and competence, the levels of trust and the models of partnership that have resulted. Why I think this is important to flag is because this also has really shaped the way in which NGOs have been established and how they've operated in the sector. And if it is this historical, we know that the systems have not fundamentally changed or shifted in a manner that allows for NGOs to wake up one day and say, we are going to do things differently. The challenges are systemic. The challenges are structural. How do we really think about approaches that also change change and transform the systems, change and transform the structures in a manner that actually frees the NGOs to be able to create wealth, to be able to work differently, and so on. I think that is very, very important, because often we expect NGOs to kind of shift and change and transform in a context that in itself is not transformed. The systems are still very much intact. And that is why, for me, even the USAID freeze is not necessarily something that we should be shocked about. I think we kind of knew it was coming, and we kind of knew it was a matter of time. And what is important, I think, for us is really to then say, how do we think about and change the systems in a manner that allow us as NGOs to create at least more leeway and more room. I think that is an important one to highlight. I also know that we've referenced part of the challenge you gave us, David, was to think about lessons we learned from COVID. And we did learn a lot of lessons as NGOs from COVID. And from the observing also the NGOs that we work with in our sector in Southern Africa. I think we learned, for instance, on the importance of an infrastructure, the need for an infrastructure that enables more access to the communities we work with. Many NGOs were cut off from the communities during lockdowns, during the COVID period. And it became very obvious, and also it was clear that community-based entities and formations that work and are within the communities are the ones that became mainly the lifelines for critical information supplies and so on within communities. And the NGO sector, we learned, of course, that we need to work on the infrastructure in ways that improve NGOs' contact with and connection with the communities. We also learned through COVID that how we plan and execute our work may not necessarily be the most effective. For instance, Charles already referenced the point that a lot of the work is short-term because it's project-based and so on and so on. And this is, of course, because of how NGOs are funded. But I think the lesson here was also more a reconfirmation of how this approach because it forces NGOs, for instance, to work through a strategy plan where you have a number of projects that you will do within this strategy cycle, and in most cases, the strategy cycle is 3 years, 2 years, 3 years, and so on. And the lesson there was that a number of organizations that were able to ride the wave of COVID, but more importantly, to kind of rebound faster, were those that had flexible resources. Back to Charles' point around, the need for flexible resources. But again, the issue comes back to the question around how do we change the systems and the structures to enable that level of flexibility and mobilization of flexible resources. Because if you think about it, realistically, even if you get long-term funding, it still has a term. It will come to an end and you will go back to square one. So the wealth creation that Charles spoke about becomes really important. But then how do we do that and do it in a manner that allows for us, first of all, to shift the systems and the structures that actually inform and provide the frame through which NGOs do their work. So maybe let me kind of close by looking at some of the challenges, not the challenges, but perhaps some of the ways in which we've been encouraging NGOs that we work with in the sector to think about. So, and maybe before I do that, let me rather also just share I know Charles referenced a number of uncomfortable questions and issues that African NGOs and other stakeholders should be asking ourselves. I think too that I could add to what Charles already highlighted. How do we navigate and acknowledge some of the contradictions that characterize our sector? So questions around our own accountability to the communities that we serve. I think that is very, very a key question, because it is a question that has often been raised, but I don't think we've engaged with it enough. And then perhaps as I close, maybe some of the ways in which we've been encouraging organizations that we work with to navigate the sector. First of all, to say start from what you already have. That mindset shift that Charles spoke about. And for us, I think it is about encouraging that mindset of abundance and not scarcity, but also encouraging organizations to really, because they sit with a lot of resource in terms of knowledge, in terms of partnerships, in terms of relationships, reputations that have been built over the years. How do you leverage that? What infrastructure do you already have? For us, for instance, part of the infrastructure that we've been able to leverage is the grant-making infrastructure that we've built over the years, and using that, for instance, for fiscal hosting and so on. How do you start off with what you already have? And then what networks have you built, and how can you make those networks work for you? What relationship, what skills base do your staff have, and so on. But the last thing that I want to mention, David, before I stop, is that part of the challenge is also that sometimes we expect NGOs to adapt and work and mobilize resources and maybe diversify their income in a context that they're actually not set up to thrive. So, for instance, how many NGOs do have the luxury of just even a resource mobilization function in their architecture, in their system? No. The CEO will double up as the resource mobilization person. They will be the M&E person. They will be the one that writes the proposals. They will be, and so we want to diversify, but we are also not supporting the NGOs to be able to actually have the capacity and the systems and the infrastructure that enables that. And I think it's a key question that we need to reflect on. So let me stop here for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alice. I'm very conscious of the time, but I have asked the panelists if they would be willing to continue for an extra 15 or 20 minutes for those that are available. So don't be concerned. We do want to get to participants also having opportunity for their questions to be answered. One of the issues that Alice raised, and she was very specific about it, is the issue of resilience. And I think finding solutions in terms of moving forward, I think resilience provides a framework, or it provides a solid starting point for the sector. We all know that the sector is resilient. Despite the changes and the challenges that we've just listened to, people continue to pitch up. Every day I see and I hear and I look at, NGOs across the continent, what they do, the things that they are busy with, the communities they serve. So there is almost this contradiction between taking strain on the one side, but at the same time, that not stopping them in executing their missions. That makes the sector resilient. That is something positive that we should be building on. So how do we take that resilience, that inbuilt, ingrained resilience, and ultimately make the sector, either on an individual organizational basis or as a collective, more risk-averse and better prepared for these external shocks or issues that continue to confront and impact our work? So I want to turn this issue to Janet as we start thinking about change. I think we have now established, and I think it is well articulated, about the size and the scale of the challenge or the issues facing the sector. But how do we change it? How do we think about the issue of reimagining the sector? Now, Janet, as many of you will know, has worked in the sector for a very long time, and probably have seen the challenges that many organizations are confronted with, the response, the setbacks, but also the positive accomplishments. So Janet, from your perspective and drawing on those experiences, where do we start, on an individual organizational level or as a collective, as a sector, to start flipping the issue around from survival to sustainability? Janet, are you with us? I think you are muted, Janet.
And now, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks, Janet.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you, and thank you for my other speakers who have, spoken before me, because I think they have really, as you said, David, they have articulated what seems to be the situation that we are facing. Thinking about how can we reimagine the NGO, I actually think one of the things we have to do is begin with ourselves. And I think Alice alluded to the idea of change of mindset. And it's true, we can blame the AIDS delivery structures, we can develop our heritage from a colonial, etc. But I feel for the years we've been around, I think it's time to actually begin to reorient our minds in such a way that we take charge of the situation. Because as you can see, all these different countries. I think Charles talked about, the UK. We've seen something from the the Dutch governments. Of course, we've known about the US. People are beginning to think about themselves probably more than they've ever done before. And there's a sense in which we are there, and if we keep doing things the way we've always done, it's like we are a bit, the situation has changed so much that we cannot survive if we just continue business as before. And when I say reorienting the mind is beginning to think about ourselves as the people who are in this continent who need to change our situations. And so we cannot be sure anymore whether people will give us money or not. They give us when they feel like. So if we have a mindset of, I call it a mindset of independence, it means we begin to do things the way that works for us and not feel like we must do things the way somebody wants them to be done. After all, when we do that, the minute they want to switch off the money, they switch it off and we are the ones who are left high and dry. So to avoid that, I feel that reorientation of the mind where we begin to actually do things in a very normal, down-to-earth way and in a cost-effective way, and thinking if the problem my organization is resolving is a long-term one, then even as I live today, I need to be thinking, how can I sustain my organization? How can I remain in business unless I begin to do something different? So that reorientation means we take a bit more ownership in where we are going, in how we do things, in how we are developing our own credibility right from where we are. At the moment, I keep seeing lots of situations where an NGO has this office somewhere, but the neighbors have no idea what this NGO does because our accountability is so geared towards just being accountable to the funders and less to the people who are around us. We think about them as, to use the word beneficiaries, but we actually have not created a relevance for who we are to them. So even if we want to raise money, how do we raise money from people who don't even know what we do? Because we've organized ourselves in such a way that the most people who matter to us are the people, of course, who give us money. So I realized we have to really reorient ourselves, reorient our mind, and have a mindset of, here we are, we have issues, we are working to resolve community issues or to support communities deal with various things. And as long as we keep an accountability that is so northern focused, how do we get to a point where we've created a group of stakeholders around us who can vouch for us? Even when the government rises up and talks about this particular NGO, who around us can even say, no, we know what they do, we know those people. So I feel reorienting the mind is one of the very important things, because that will make us do things differently. We will do things in a more down-to-earth way. We don't need to go to the most expensive hotel in town to do our workshops. We'll be thinking about things from a very normal, sustainable approach, as opposed to, oh, I have this budget, I need to spend it. I think we need to get to a point where we work in such a way that even when we have saved money, we are able to go back to the fund and maybe even say, by the way, we have achieved the things we have agreed with you, but we've still a balance. Can you allow us to use this money for X, Y, and Z, which is important? Or can you allow us to put this in our reserves since we already did what we agreed to do? So that really comes from taking ownership, taking responsibility, and not thinking of ourselves as contractors. If we think of ourselves as contractors, then we are just there for somebody to use us. And when they are done, they go. When they have no use, they switch off. But when we look at the problems most of us are dealing with, most of those problems are not disappearing. And that's why that reorientation of our minds, creating local credibility, building our systems, I think Alice has really touched on that. Working in such a way, if people are going to find us credible, it means we actually do invest in strengthening, in putting our systems in place, even when we negotiate for money. That internal strengthening, which allows us to continue to show our credibility, what we did, what we achieved, reporting not only to the guys on the north, but even to constituency, holding days where we communicate about ourselves, all become very critical things. And of course, within that space, I've realized, and I remember, I've realized there are various things one can do, from working in such a way that you don't have to spend, you don't think about yourself as spending the budget because of that. You are doing this because you have a budget. You need to do what you need to do because it is important and in the most down-to-earth way. And that's why I'm talking about reorienting our minds to a point where we are not just contractors. If we see ourselves as contractors, honestly, our life is likely to be short term because it is on the whims of somebody. And within that, I think there are various things. As we develop local credibility, it means there is room for even the people around us to want to support, to want to understand, to want to engage. And there are different things that they may come across, that they might find they are able to give. From giving, how about using this space? How about using an office in a cheaper place than where you are? Because where you are affording because somebody is paying that money. But when you reorient yourself, you don't have to go to think about being seen, being visible, being seen as, oh, this is a very progressive NGO because it is driving around in big cars. When we show ourselves as very extravagant, how do people ever think they can support us? Why should they? When our behavior, the way they perceive us, is of, very extravagant, well-funded people who don't need, who don't really, they have this money from whoever, and so they can do anything. That's why we are saying it is reorienting ourselves, reorienting our ways of working, and then beginning to work in a manner where we think about saving and achieving what we want to do in the most practical, down-to-earth way. Building local credibility, this becomes the beginning of us beginning to fundraise, whether it is companies, whether it is individuals, whether it is high net worth people, whether it is a membership. There are some of us who run membership type of organizations. When we do things in such a way, or even people wanting to come and contribute because of what they have, allowing the African philanthropic way of working to just take its course, because you don't always give money. Sometimes you give your time. Sometimes you give, in kind, what you have, which allows something to happen. So when we think in a very normal way, we will less think about a show off, but actually getting our work done. And then with that, it becomes the foundation for a strong organization, a stable, well-run, accountable organization. And of course, this begins to build a network of different types of varieties of support that can emerge from the people that are around us. I remember being in this situation myself, running an organization, and I realized very often from other organizations I knew, sometimes when you save, I saw the practice of, oh, we can do with another printer, or we can do with another car, or we can do, you just think about the next thing you want to buy. But how do you leverage and build reserves unless you are able and willing to start small? I found when we are willing to build and start small, you actually eventually, it's just like a normal family. A normal family just saves and keeps finding practical ways of doing going to where they want to go based on the targets they have for themselves. And you don't wait to have big money for you to start saving. So that mentality of a saving culture, a down-to-earth way of having relationships with the people around us, I think that is some of the things that we really need to build as part of reinventing ourselves and stop being contractors to actually becoming people who are pursuing things they believe in. And when I think about this work, I actually think when we approach it from conviction, from a belief we are actually making a difference, we no longer are contractors. But if we put ourselves as contractors, we are more likely to end up in the wrong kind of book. So from savings to taking different offers that people may have, doing events, all these different things, doing a fundraiser, whether it is a dinner, very down to earth type of thing, those things become the foundations and they actually then become a leverage. I remember one time, one organization actually that eventually gave us the plot when I worked for KCDF. They watched over us for a 10-year period and realized this is actually a credible organization. And so when to move in there initially, we had the option to go and rent an expensive building or go and renovate what used to be a refugee center. We opted for the latter because once we renovated the building, we did not have to do monthly payments for rent. And from that, the owner of this organization was actually the Aga Khan Foundation. When they watched over us over a 10-year period, they were like, these are credible people. Let's give them this plot. And that's how the first ownership of a plot came about. And of course, different organizations have different things going for them. It might mean you, as an organization, buying a plot at a lower rate, but at least you begin to secure that office. But this comes from having a normal, down-to-earth way of resolving things, as opposed to, I want to be in the best part of town so that people can believe who I am. And yet that is what I call a fake life, because it's a life that is attached to the fact that someone is paying you a big rent. When that person gives up, that's the end of it. So, David, I just want to pause there initially as I say that reorientation of the mind, us approaching our work, not going for expensive venues, just being practical in what we are doing, not allowing ourselves to be contractors, but really work in the things, the interventions we are trying to believe in. I believe this will reimagine and help us not to think about this NGO as this dependent 100%, to begin to shift and to move to a point where we have something. We need to begin with very practical, down-to-earth things and approach to how we are resolving our day-to-day type of work. I'll pause there for now.
Thank you, Janet, for those very profound comments regarding reorientation, which is obviously key to reimagining the sector. I want to move to Wanyiku, probably the one that sits slightly outside of the sector, but deals with the sector very specifically through her work at Microsoft. Now, if funding is the elephant in the room, the do or die issue in the room is probably how the sector approaches and engages with technology. I think there's a common understanding that many NGOs have neglected their investment in technology, and therefore the move to AI either is a huge barrier or creates even further uncertainty. So I think in terms of reimagining the sector, I can imagine that technology and AI is one of the key building blocks or one of the key tools that this sector can use proactively and in a very meaningful way. So Wanyiko, in terms of your experience, the work that you do at Microsoft, but also in your engagements with NGOs, what are the challenges? What are, say, simple steps that they can take? What advice can you give to NGOs vis-a-vis technology and AI as they either confront their current challenges or, to the focus of our conversation, help reimagining their work and kind of future-proof their work? So over to you, Wanyiko.
Okay, thank you very much, David, and to the rest of the panelists who have spoken so well, going in depth around the changes happening within the sector. And it's great to be in front of this audience of over 300 people. And okay, maybe just to touch on, my background is from a technology side of things. Most of the times we've seen from my background in technology in development over the last about 4 to 5 years. When I compare it against, of course, other sectors we've seen for sure there's a larger number of there's a very large number of nonprofits globally and even within Africa, but very few of them are utilizing technology, and especially with the growth that we've seen in technology over the last few years, where we've seen the ability to resolve more, to use technology to resolve, complex challenges. We see it even more fitting, technology even fitting more now in the development sector than even other sectors that other industries that we've seen, just because of how technology has grown. With the growth of more storage, with the growth of more compute power, it means that we should be applying the technology to more complex challenges which nonprofits generally address. But we have seen an actual increased demand of nonprofits who have adopted technology, saying they have seen the impact that technology is having. Unfortunately, these numbers are on a global scale rather than on a continent scale on Africa. But we are more and more doing research within the continent. But we're seeing a lot of nonprofits being very satisfied with technology and expecting to use technology even in a bigger way. However, we've seen challenges across the ecosystem, being that, of course, there's the lack of resources and them declining. There's also a poor visibility of data and insights that the nonprofit sector is continuously, taking. A lot of it has been, of course, manual in the past, but the more uptake of digital data and insights needs to be done to reduce that kind of poor visibility. Of course, there are more cyber threats targeting nonprofits, just based on the way that nonprofits, of course, fundraise and donations coming through. There's a greater and also the kind of data, personal information data that nonprofits collect. It leads to more cyber threats targeting nonprofits. There's also another challenge we've seen, of course, is low technical knowledge and adoption of technology. Leading to a lot of disconnected data and documents within nonprofits. And some of them we've seen also having ineffective legacy tech solutions, which may not keep abreast with the changing technology that is there. So based on our engagement in the sector, we've seen this as the challenges that we have seen across nonprofits, even despite them working towards their core focus areas and priorities around program delivery, how to engage with stakeholders such as donors, donors and also supporters and volunteers, and how to continuously streamline and secure operations. So those are the kinds of, after our engagement within the sector, those are the kinds of challenges and priorities we see. In ways technology can help these priorities and address these challenges that you're facing. We tend to see, especially with the capacity constraints, that are being faced in terms of resourcing. We see technology fitting very well in that, with an increased demand, we've seen with an increased demand of, more pressure from donors expecting so much more. We've seen more and more nonprofits, 71% of nonprofits who are continuously pegging their program on technology, showing increase in opportunities for funding and for donations from donors. So we understand the challenge about capacity constraint, but we see an opportunity for technology in helping deal with the capacity constraints, and depending more on technology to do automation of tasks, and address this. Of course, there is also program delivery has been affected in a large way in terms of staffing and having the right kind of staff and skills that you need to be effective or impactful among nonprofits. So we see also technology being able to address the resourcing in terms of staffing challenges, such that you can automate a lot of processes using technology. Of course, we have seen more technology players coming in to really try and make technology affordable to nonprofits. My background within just Microsoft, seeing over the last few years how they have tried to make it, gives technology grants to small nonprofits, just based on how it can be sustainable in the long term. That we don't keep pulling offers and grants off the table. We give most of the times between 5 to 10 licenses, which can really help small nonprofits or even community-based organizations to leverage technology and do and at least be digitally accountable, and they can be digitally visible by using these kinds of technologies. So we give grants, small technology grants, most of the times between 5 to 10 licenses of products that we have seen very impactful among nonprofits, like collaboration software, how to collaborate with or how to be visible by having a domain, and sending out emails with your domain name. So we've seen, we give those kinds of technology grants to nonprofits to enable them to do that. For larger nonprofits, we discount significantly to be able to address this, usually between 50 and 75% of the price we give to the commercial sector, which is mainly, in terms of removing the profit out and just passing on the price of production of the technology to nonprofits so that it can be viable and sustainable. In engaging of supporters and funders, we see for nonprofits that have higher technology adoption, we see donor retention continue to rise because of using technology to have a regular communication cycle, an automated communication cycle with stakeholders such as donors and with volunteers. With personalized communication as well, so such that you're not sending out, blasting out an email to generally with the same kind of email, but personalizing the communication. We see about 77% of nonprofits believing that personalized communication is actually very critical, and technology can really aid in personalizing that form of communication without having to, dig deep into your pockets, because technology can help you, just automate that whole process and pass out personalized communication. Lastly, in the pillar around, so the first one was the impact pillar around program delivery. How can technology assist you to be more impactful? The second was around how can technology assist you to support, to engage with your stakeholders. The third is around how can you streamline operations for nonprofits using technology. The good thing about technology is that it can not only just automate the financial aspects, but it also gives visibility to those who need to have visibility on your financial obligations, and how you're meeting them. So it also automates that process of conveying that kind of information around the operation side. It also reduces the burnout among nonprofit employees. Once they're not spending so much of their time and effort streamlining operations in terms of program delivery or in terms of just balancing the books, but that they can depend on technology to help to assist them in that way and communicate to the rest of the team the work that they're doing. So that helps in streamlining operations and making sure that the finances, the things like procurement, aspects such as how to hire and retain talents that you have among nonprofits. Having a system that manages these kinds of operations really stabilizes nonprofits as well. As I mentioned as well, on the grants and offers that we give, some of these are able to address that. And we also know other technology vendors who are doing so much more in the security space, making sure that they give grants to nonprofits in other spaces that we are not giving as Microsoft. And we work through partners such as TechSoup, who are a nonprofit player in the tech space, to really help nonprofits adopt, because they are faced, us as technology vendors, sometimes we can be so commercially focused and may not understand the direct needs of nonprofits. But leveraging and collaborating with partners such as TechSoup, who nonprofits know and are aware of and can reach out to and share the same vision, probably they are able to, by working through in collaboration with them, they're able to assist us pass the message on to nonprofits and help us validate the process, to make sure that we are not giving these things out to commercial entities, and who are taking advantage and reducing the sustainability of it, but we are actually giving it to legitimate nonprofits who are using it for impact. So we work in collaboration with them. They help us to validate, and it's not just us as a vendor, but multiple technology vendors work with them to make sure the message is passed on. And we've seen the uptake growing across the continent, and I believe TechSoup has presence across the North Africa, West Africa, South Africa, and Central Africa, to be able to address the needs that you have for technology. They also provide skilling, digital skilling. Sometimes the ability to scale out skilling initiatives can be a big challenge because the continent is large, and there are a large number of nonprofits. But I would encourage you to make use of the digital skilling initiatives, rather than wait on in-person engagements, which can be expensive and can be difficult to scale. So we leverage the digital skilling that is there, offered by organizations such as TechSoup. Reach out to them as a nonprofit themselves. They're able to assist you and are able to understand the challenges that we face. But we are also trying to build out our teams as technology vendors to really make sure that we're customizing our technology in a way that really addresses the nonprofit challenges, that we're not just copy pasting what we have developed for the commercial sector into the nonprofit sector, but we are actually understanding the challenges that are being faced and developing and customizing our solutions to address those challenges. I think I'll stop on that note and hand it over back to David. Thank you.
Thank you, Wanyiko. So as a last question, I asked the panelists to prepare something around financial sustainability and very practical advice. But for giving our time constraints, I'm going to ask Emanuela to share with us a few of the questions with a specific focus on funding and financial sustainability issues, so that at least we give the panelists an opportunity to listen to the questions, and whatever comments I prepared around financial sustainability, then to combine it with those questions. So Emanuela, if I can maybe hand over to you to maybe give us, say, 3 or 4 questions, and then we'll do one round with the panelists. And let's, for those that have some time available, if we can say, commit to another 15 minutes for a round of questions, and then say final comments and closure. Emanuela, over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of the panelists for an amazing conversation and sharing some great insights. So I'm just going to go through the questions, as David mentioned, specific to funding. The first one I see here, I'm starting with the Q&A box. If you're not able to drop your questions in the Q&A box, as usual, please drop them in the chat. The first is, how can African NGOs, especially young, growing, youth-led, community-based organizations, get sustainable funding streams for sustaining their operations without depending more on external funding? The second one is almost the same thing. How can NGOs still in formative stages thrive in terms of funding and support? I see one on how do we leverage public-private partnerships. Yeah, in the question box, that's all relating to funding. Let me see in the chat if there is any other question. Yes, what are some of the best and promising sustainability models that we can learn from? I think that's it for the questions sort of relating to funding. Maybe we could take this first while I go through any other questions relating to funding.
Thank you, Manuela. So I think, Charles, we'll start with you, and every panelist takes 2 or 3 minutes maximum, reflect on any of those 4 questions. And maybe the whole idea is for some practical advice, even, you know, the type of advice and assistance that you are currently providing to the NGOs that you are working with or that are approaching you for very specific assistance and support in maneuvering or managing current funding constraints. So Charles, we'll start with you, then we'll move to Alice, Janet, and then Wanyeku.
So thank you so much. I've really learned a lot from the conversation so far. And thank you so much for the questions. Just to start off, I think in terms of practical shifting, when we are looking at diversification, the focus, and usually when we are working with organizations, we always say that the most important thing is to have clarity about your mission, and then the value that your mission actually provides. What happens with resources, that resources are attracted by the value that you have. You can only generate resources when you are able to monetize the work that you are doing, and for you to be able to monetize the work that you're doing, it must give value to either the community, the audience, or should we even say your partners, right? And so when we work with organizations, we start from the basics, really looking not just at financial sustainability, but identity. What is your identity, right? What is your vision, right? And then we also then look at your governance and leadership, which is also key, because if you don't have the right systems and structures in place, it will make it very difficult for you to attract or even generate the kind of funding that you need to generate. Then, of course, like Janet said, the reason you actually exist is because of the interventions that you are doing, right? To what extent are those co-created and owned by those that you are representing or working with, right? So at WAXI, we always say that when your identity is strong, your interventions is strong, right? And your governance and leadership is also strong. Financial sustainability then will be added onto you, right? So it's something that it's interlinked. It's not just about diversifying, but you must be clear about your own mission and the value. For the questions, I saw a question about what models have worked, and this is extremely important, right? Now, in terms of the models, this depends a lot on the kind of organization that you are. We have different types. We have, and you all know this. You have the typical service provision organizations, the typical advocacy and research organizations, the think tanks. Sometimes we have organizations that are a blend of many of these aspects, right? And so we've seen that, for example, with social enterprises, right, it works very well with service provision organizations because you already have a service you're providing, and you can develop that into a product, and then you can monetize that to generate income, right? If you're doing advocacy, it becomes very challenging to have a social enterprise model. All right, but you could also generate funding from doing things like crowdfunding or digital giving, because if you have an advocacy issue, you can mobilize around that issue or issues to generate funding. You can get funding also and support from convincing stakeholders who are not necessarily based in a specific community, but are from that community and live elsewhere. So with advocacy organizations, you can tap into diaspora engagement. You can tap into in-kind kind of contributions. So it all depends on the various on how your organization operates, right? Some have used the route of developing microfinancing models. Some have gone into endowment funds, and Janet can talk a lot more about that because they have gone through that process of developing not only an endowment fund for KCDF when she was there, but also helped other organizations to establish these kind of investment funds and reserves, right? But I want to go back to something. For you to get there, your systems and your structures should be in place. There should be clarity about the staff's role or contribution to financial sustainability. There should be clarity about the board's role. It cannot just be about the executive director. It cannot be the burden of the executive director. Otherwise, you will not be able to achieve much. And I just want to end by saying that ultimately, it's about us as organizations building strong local roots, right? Financially and institutionally, and of course, based on trust. It's about our organizations becoming rooted in the real sense of it, owned by those who we work with, those we say we are representing, right? It's about us having a clear plan on how we're going to diversify our funding sources. It's about us taking advantage of the local environment, looking within, nurturing local philanthropy. It's about us exploring which specific alternative funding model will work for us as an organization, right? It's about us also connecting more deeply with the community. And when I say community, beyond our own immediate stakeholders, right? The general public, do they understand the work that we do? How do we connect the way we communicate the work we do? How are we communicating our impact? How are we sharing our story? All these are very, very important elements, right? But just to quickly say, ultimately, like I said before, it's also about leadership, and the leadership that is able to adapt and be flexible and embrace change, right? And a leadership that is about, ensuring shared power and not dependency. I believe if we take that route, if we consciously and systematically and intentionally take that route, 10 years or 15 years from now, the story could be quite different. So thank you so much, David and Emanuela.
Thank you very much, Charles. So Alice, if I can ask you to keep your comments to 2 minutes, please. Thank you.
I will be shorter than that. I think Charles has done an amazing job already of summarizing what I would have highlighted. I think the only thing that I can add is that perhaps think of your organization, your NGO, as part of a broader ecosystem, so that even as you are starting, especially for questions that came around organizations that are just starting or that, at the nascent stages of formation. So think of that intervention, and it is part of a contribution that you are making as part of a broader ecosystem, and that helps because that will point you to others that may actually be contributing in similar ways, but others that may also be part of that ecosystem that sit with a certain kind of resource that may not necessarily be financial, that you could leverage and tap into. And I think examples have already been shared, especially around some of the knowledge that some organizations that have been part of the system for a long time might have to share, and so you don't necessarily have to repeat the same mistakes, so to speak. So if that way, I think it helps because you also leverage even the resources in terms of where you thinking of putting in proposals for resource funding, for fundraising. You can partner with others that have built a reputation, that have systems in place, and you are able to access resources, and then in the process also get the mentorship that Charles spoke of earlier, mentorship, and you also get to learn from others that have experience in that regard. So, but I also think it's even more important when you think about the context, because the new world order, I think that and the shifting geopolitics that we see and the models that we see around actually demand that we kind of reimagine the ways in which we work, from competition to collaboration. And that, I think, is very, very important as a mindset, especially for organizations that are starting, to not come into the sector to perhaps compete with the next organization, but to explore possibilities for collaboration and be able to raise money as part of an ecosystem in that. And then the only other one that I can add, which again has been said earlier, is around repurposing the skills and experiences that you have. The models for sustainability are not a one size fit all. I think Charles is right in saying that, you really kind of understand the value addition that you bring, and then what aligned with that, then look at the skills and experiences that you have in your team and repurpose those to be able to really then support you to set up and to effectively contribute in the sector. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alice. Janet, if I can come to you, I know the whole idea was also to find some time this afternoon for you to speak more to the KCDF model. Charles also referenced that, but since we don't have time for an in-depth overview of the KCDF experience, but maybe just for a minute or two, some practical advice based on that experience that you can share with participants.
Thank you. Yes, and I would say I agree with those who have gone before me in terms of those practical things, in terms of setting the tone, the basis of your fundraising. And just put it this way, that your work is your biggest fundraiser, what you do, what you are known for. And so the one foundational thing is building trusting relationships with the people you work with, the communities, with the funders, because it is from that people allow you to push your boundaries. So picking around, practical things, I mentioned that it was from having built trust over a period with whoever had allowed us to use their renovated property for an office, that after a while they were like, these people are credible, let's give them. So trusting relationship is so important. Another important practical thing I would say is within that model, we tried to develop relationships with corporates, with high net worth people. And so I remember there was one Asian guy who would say, I'm willing to put in like 2 million every year so that you guys can give scholarships. That only comes because they trust. They have seen you have a good system. You are really targeting very needy students, and you are able to deliver because your structures are in place. And that trust relationship allows them to say, I will fund this. Another one would say, I am ready to support you to do this particular work. And for a while, you just do the work. And later, when we wanted to develop a property, which we did get to a point, one other Asian contractor said, I'm ready to become your contractor because I like what you do. And that's what I'm saying. People will give you different services because they have come to trust you. So trusting relationships is a very fundamental thing. One other thing which also happened during the time when I was trying to really work very hard, we really believed in the sustainability of what we were trying to do. And the organization still does and continues to pursue these things. And I remember there's a time when Ford Foundation wanted to experiment with, organizations, like trying to build a couple of organizations within the continent, and said, we will give you a chance to raise money, however you raise it, and we will match up to this point. Like if $3 million was the kind of thing. So to match 3,000, you raise 1.5. And so even when you think about mobilizing for a dinner, mobilizing for a golf tournament, mobilizing for a walk, I mean, we did all kinds of things. And the reason that people will agree to come to these things is because they trust you. If they don't trust you, it makes it very hard for you to whatever. And I would also say that usually some of these unique opportunities, when somebody tells you, I'm willing to match up to this point, if you raise 1.5 million Kenya shilling, no, $1.5 million, it wasn't Kenya shilling, it was $1 million. The reason they're telling you is because they also have trust in you. They have observed you. Maybe they have been funding your programs. And in this case, they had been funding some of the, giving us some money for caucus, etc. And so after a while, when they tell you, we'll give you this opportunity, this window of opportunity to do this, it's because of trust. And so that's why it is so important, whether it is with our funders, with the communities, with the people who are potentially able to give us resources, it's so important that what we are doing is genuine, is authentic, and it's being done in the most accountable way. We increase our chances. And there is not one solution, like my colleagues have said, which works for everybody. But everybody can review where they are and then kind of pick up and see what is it that you can do. I also realized when you have a trust relationship, you can negotiate with a funder for any money you didn't spend. You can come back and say, can you allow us to put this saving into the reserves, or can you allow us to put this amount of money to this because we've actually done what we promised to do. So I would really just end, because I can see we have a limit with time. Of course, there is room to do a lot of different things depending on where you are, what advantages you have. Even if somebody is going to donate something to you, that relationship, because you are so accountable, you are doing what you do effectively in a credible manner, it just increases your opportunity to explore. Even the funds, we began to help communities grow their own small endowments for different things they wanted. They have to trust you for them to raise money and bring to you to invest, which is exactly what happens up to this day. They still funds that communities hold in the foundation at KCDA because they trust. So let's really work at growing credible organizations. Let our work sell us, and somehow we'll begin to see practical things that we can do so that we end up with a more sustaining, more resilient, organizations. At least over a 20-year period, there should be something that shows you can continue and not 100% dependent on that one or two funders. If you really follow your heart and follow your path and go full scale. I'll stop there, David.
Thank you so much, Janet. So Wanyuku, I hope you're still with us. The final word will be yours.
Okay, thank you so much, David. I think just to pick up on Janet's sentiments around building trust and being authentic and credible, I think our digital footprint contributes towards this, and using technology. Sometimes the aspect around being open and sharing is just based on your nonprofits' inability to be able to scale and to be entrepreneurial, because they're handling so much manually and just on their own. It limits them on just their capability to be able to be open and to scale out. So just having digital presence opens you up for feedback and for people to give feedback on just the impact it has had on them, to give feedback for donors to have a look at you at their own time and their own convenience. It opens you up to a lot of accountability when you have digital presence, because it's visible to even to the level of the public, and that opens up accountability, it opens up visibility, and it opens up credibility, a lot of credibility. So I would also encourage you to see technology not as such a sometimes we've gotten feedback from a lot of nonprofits. It's such an expense. It feels like such an expense. But seeing it as an opportunity to be able to drive the trust, to be able to drive the accountability, to be able to collaborate and to share using the digital platforms really takes it a notch higher on how much dependency there can be. I know there's also a lot of aspect around security and privacy. Probably there are a lot of concerns around the responsibility in AI, fairness and inclusiveness of it. And of course, it's a whole new other topic, but partnering with technology partners that, of course, are taking into consideration these responsible AI principles to make sure that your data remains your data and only you have access to it, and you're securing it. You have the opportunity to secure it yourself and to make sure that you have a limit on who you can share it with so that it's accountable is also very important. So just based, I feel there's also been a lot of fear among nonprofits around using technology. Other than the aspect around the expense and the cost of it, there's also fear around just how responsible it is, how fair it is, how inclusive it is. But I think the more we drive the usage of it, the more people can see, even technology players can see the impact that it's creating, and even make it more affordable and accessible to nonprofits. So I'll also leave it at that. David, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Wanjiku. So before handing back to Emanuela, from my side, I'm not going to try and summarize what was shared with us this afternoon. I just saw some of the comments, and someone just said, so much wisdom. I think we need a couple more hours to do justice to some of these issues and get the real benefit of the wisdom of our four panelists. So to Alice, to Charles, to Wanjiku, and to Janet, thank you very much for making time, sharing that wisdom with us this afternoon. Maybe two key takeaways, something practical, food for thought, but I think it also something to kind of hang on to and maybe help drive the conversation forward. I think, Janet, you just made the comment, let our work sell us. And someone else said, your work is your fundraiser. So we are resilient, we are challenged, but we are resilient. I think the wisdom from the panelists, there is a lot of wisdom and experience in the space. Let's utilize what we have amongst us in trying to find solutions for the challenges that face the sector, and that we ultimately can reimagine the sector and move it to a better place. So from my side, thank you once again for your participation, and thank you once again to the panelists. Emanuela, back to you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to our amazing panelists for your participation, great answers, and everyone who has participated so far. And so before we just wrap up quickly, at Hexa Media, every World NGO Day, we always celebrate 27 amazing organizations from across Africa doing great work for humanity. And we have a publication around this. And also, David also has some publication that has already gone out. If you check in the chat right now, a member of the team from Hexa Media has dropped the links to David's profile and also the link to the publication for Hexa's top African NGOs. Please go there to check it out, to support some of these NGOs, and also follow Hexa Media on social media to stay updated. Every year, we, get some of these organizations and showcase their work, tell their stories, leveraging our Humanitarians of Africa series on YouTube and also the Humanitarians of Africa Awards. As much as possible, you would want to leverage this for visibility, like all our panelists have rightly said. So next steps. There's going to be a session replay available latest tomorrow. So if you missed any conversation, you missed anything that the panelists paid attention to, you can go back to the session replay and watch it. So check out our emails and also social media, because we're going to put up some posts to alert you about that. We also would be having future forums for discussions. Hopefully, all of that will be communicated via email as much as possible. And like I said, the World NGO Day features all in the chat. All of the links are in the chat for you to go and read up all of this information as much as possible. So thank you so much again to everyone. If you haven't followed us on social media, we share a lot of educational content around running your NGO, around leveraging technology and digital media, digital fundraising for your NGO. Please do well to follow us. Also follow David on LinkedIn, follow African NGOs on X, and we wish you a very, very wonderful World NGO Day, and cheers to your sustainability. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Have a wonderful weekend ahead. Bye-bye.